Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning, and you're very welcome to another Signpost Series webinar. I hope you're all keeping well and looking forward to a very interesting presentation. It's great to be with you here again. Monitoring biodiversity on Irish farms is critical to map habitats, assess ecological value, and support farmers enhancing biodiversity. But what tools are being used in this area? And we're delighted to be joined this morning by Dr. Cian White of Trinity College Dublin. Cian, a lot of work is done on the biodiversity front in Ireland, but how important of a role is remote sensing going to play in Irish farms, or is playing maybe?
Yeah, remote sensing is going to play a massive component to any of the sustainability piece. So for me, the biggest issue with trying to monitor sustainability is the cost of it, particularly if we're doing it at the per farm level. And if you think about supply chains as well, the cost is just massive. You have the likes of the Origin Green program, the board BA surveys to go and capture the farm management data, and that's great. But to do landscape mapping or anything like this, you can't have people like me going and mapping the farms. In my view, it's just too costly. So we need to use the power of these satellites that are continuously, circling the Earth, and the power of computer technology, AI, to reduce the costs of this ability to map things, not just biodiversity, but there's lots of other things you can do with it too. Agronomics, productivity of land, etc. So that remote sensing piece, it's going to be precision agriculture. It's all going to come into that. It's just the technology that's going to be critical for any kind of future agricultural practices, I think. Yeah,
we were even talking before we come on, and boots on the ground is great, but it's very resource heavy and time consuming, and it has been an obstacle for years and years, but the new technologies are really going to get over that.
And you need the boots on the ground at the same time. So it's how do you complement that section, the advisory section, etc., with technologies that give insights without having to invest huge. Like again, some of the work that I did previously was doing this kind of farm monitoring, similar to the asset advisors, but not quite. I was more mapping the habitats, but it took me, I could do a farm a day, maybe less, and there's no way to do that at scale. So we need technologies that can do this at scale if we're going to be serious about kind of monitoring biodiversity, etc. in an agricultural system.
So okay, Cian, I think you're good to go. We'll chat to you.
You can see. Great. Okay. So I'm going to talk about biodiversity in agricultural supply chains, and the measurement of it, but also I think of as important as the measurement is like, how do we valorize it? How do we make it, economically potentially useful for farmers? So I want to talk about the policy around that and some of the private sector policy too, kind of insetting. So I have a few different topics to talk about. It's not just the measurement piece. So I want to talk about insetting. Insetting is kind of a new buzzword, I'd say, but you're all actually very familiar with it. If you're a farmer, you're probably in an insetting program right now. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. So I'm going to go through what definition of what insetting is, some international examples of insetting, sustainability schemes, Irish examples, and what I think some of the future developments might be around here. And then I want to talk a little bit about EU policy, not too much, don't worry. Kind of mention some of the big frameworks that have come out, particularly this carbon removals and certification framework. Stuart probably talked about this last week, but I also want to mention it. And then there's some talk about nature credits at the EU level as well. So I'll just have a brief section on that. And that's kind of set the scene then for what I think is the monitoring piece. So these policies and in the insetting programs, the sustainability programs, are what will give value to biodiversity. And that's why it's important then to measure it. So I'll talk about some of the existing tools and then how we use satellite and AI to monitor this at a farm level and give some examples of that, and then where might this be going in the future. So that's the structure of the talk. So insetting, just a brief overview, and just to say this is a project that I'm involved with that's funded by the Department of Agriculture. So it's the Farm Credit Project. So it's trying to look at how we get the private sector, how the private sector is funding sustainability practices at the farm level. So it's the funder of this project support to the note. We have Bioorbic, AIB and Carberry as partners in this project. just a brief history into my background. So I would have worked on the Farm Zero C project. So that was a project, again, run by Orbit and Carberry, where they worked with Cian White Dairy Farm down in Bandon. And over, 4 years here, managed to reduce emissions by roughly 25%. And at the same time, increase the biodiversity on the farm from about 7.5 to 10%. I think that's a nice blueprint of how a relatively intensive farm can become more sustainable. For me, the question is how do you scale out all this technology and these management practices to the whole farming industry? The technology, a lot of technology management strategies now exist, and a lot of them are being scaled. I think the uptake of clover, etc. Protected urea, they're examples of those kind of technology scaling. But there's many more to come. How do we scale those technologies to reduce emissions? So obviously the public incentives through the CAP very important. The Teagasc advisory service is very important. But what I wanted to research in this project was: is there a role for the supply chain to incentivize farmers? So what's the ambition in the private sector to look at funding sustainability schemes? And so this is where it comes to insetting. So this is a picture I've stolen from Rabobank. They gave a presentation at a conference, EU Carbon Farming Conference in Dublin in March. And they talk about insetting and offsetting, and they I think this kind of draws out the distinction. So here at the top we have like allocation of carbon. So at the top here we have corporate emissions. So if a tech company wants to purchase livestock farmer tree planting carbon credits, they can offset their emissions, their own emissions from their own electricity, fuel use, etc. That's offsetting. So it's a company purchasing carbon credits from outside their own supply chain to offset their own operational emissions. That's one example of offsetting. Another example, so again, project location here is within or outside supply chain. Another one could be, so this is a tech company, non-agricultural company, but agricultural company, a retailer, etc., chocolate company in this case, could buy forestry credits from, some farmer somewhere that they're getting supplies from, and use that to offset their own operational emissions, to offset the amount of electricity and fuel they use, what we call Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And that's again offsetting. So you're purchasing credits to offset your own operational emissions. But one of the big kind of drivers now is this insetting theme, right? So rather than a company purchasing to offset their own emissions from their own fuel use, the way we account for carbon now, so these companies are now somehow they'll have to account for all the emissions further up the supply chain. So a company like Tesco now has to report how much emissions are at the farm level. This is what they call the Scope 3 emissions, or the farm level emissions. So a lot of these companies are now setting targets to reduce these emissions at the farm level. And this is what's called insetting. So when a company pays not to reduce the emissions they're directly responsible for, but they pay to reduce the emissions further up the supply chain with farms that they're getting product from, that's called insetting. So a dairy company co-invests in suppliers' farm reduction, methane reduction, and they can then sell low carbon footprint milk. So it's a good example is, say, a Tesco, a Musgraves, even a McDonald's, paying farmers to use some technologies, and they can then purchase lower carbon products from these farmers. So they're not directly offsetting their own emissions. What they're doing is purchasing lower emission products and paying for the technology to be rolled out in farm. So this insetting is a huge, it's a very, very popular subject at the moment in the corporate accounting world. So this is where this research project is focused on. What is the ambition within the corporate sector to meet these targets that they're setting? So I'm going to go through a few of these examples now. To make this just to maybe more visually. So first, for a product like cheese or milk, even 90% of the emissions happen at the farm level. So some emissions happen at the processor level, some happen at the wholesaler level, some have to happen at the retailer level. But if you were buying half a block of cheese or a block of cheese from a retailer, 90% emissions in that cheese happening at the farm level. So it's kind of downstream, upstream, it's just a bit of jargon. But so of a processor, if you look at a processor emissions, 90% of those emissions happen at the farm level. If we go up to the wholesaler, 60 to 90% happen at the farm level. And you go up to a retailer, up to 50%. Their total emissions. This is not just at the product level, but their total footprint is farm level emissions. So all these companies are now involved with the farms because there's so much emissions happening at the farm level. So they are looking back down the supply chain and they're thinking about how do we reduce emissions at the farm level? And obviously that it means some kind of transaction of money. Now, what the ambition of that is yet to be seen. Certainly at the processors, not just milk, but beef too, are having these sustainability schemes. And I'll give you some examples of wholesalers who are doing it. But, this is it's ongoing development to see how serious the retailers in particular are. Do the discounters really want to be paying for low carbon milk? That's still yet to be seen. But there are certainly companies that do this at scale. So that's insetting. It's companies pushing money down to the farm level to reduce the emissions at the farm level, and they get lower emission products as a result. So I just want to give you some examples of this, international ones. So Valio is a farmer co-op, Finnish, 3,400, largest co-op in Finland by a large section. And they've set a carbon neutral target for 2035. So Finland as a whole wants to be carbon neutral by 2035. It's very ambitious. And then Valio has also set this target to be net zero by 2035. By far the most ambitious target I've seen. And this is their climate transition plan. And here's the breakdown of all their emission sources. So this includes their own operational emissions, the trucks, the processing of the milk, etc. All that kind of stuff comes in on their factory logistics, probably other. And you can see just how much the milk production at the farm level contributes, and then the land use as well. So that's 90% of emissions there. So this is why these companies have to go and look at the farms to reduce emissions if they want to get this net zero target. So they want to reduce emissions at the farm by 31% by 2035. Then reduce peatland emissions. A lot of peatland, similar kind of situation to Ireland. A lot of farmed peatland. So you want to reduce peatland emissions by roughly half by 2035. And then there's also this kind of magic wand down here. They want to new technology is going to come online, which can reduce emissions by another 22%. So they've set this target, then they've created a sustainability program. So 86% of dairy farms are committed to this sustainability work. So it's again a bonus for the milk price. It was 1 cent per litre, it's gone up since then. But they're paying farmers for various different sustainability actions. And this is one example, but there's many more. I'm just going to keep going through them just to show you kind of the level of ambition that some companies have. So Friesland Campina, 14,000 dairy farmers all over kind of northern Europe. They have this results-based payment system called Focus. And in 2023, don't have a number yet for 2024, but 2023, they say they put 245 million into this sustainability premium, or 3.5 cent per litre bonus possible for a farmer. And they've set this target to reduce emissions by 33% for the milk. Again, so they're looking down the supply chain. They've set a target for their own operational emissions, so minus 63%, but for the milk, it's 33%. And this is I'll come back to this in a second, but this is a science-based targets initiative target. So there's a framework all these companies use to set these targets. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And then this is the kind of structure of this results-based payment system. So they have kind of 4 themes: animal welfare and kind of health and longevity. So kind of genetics, breeding, etc. The actual footprint of the milk. So each farm will have a footprint of the amount of milk per litre. And then as a farmer reduces the emissions, you get progressively rewarded for having lower emissions. So it's very tiered and it's kind of results based. So you're paid on the results, not so much the action of. So I think there's a bit more freedom, say, to pick and choose things to do within the system. They have a whole section on biodiversity. Nature and landscape is one of that. Now it's lots of different things in here. It's not all just biodiversity, but they do have a section on biodiversity, and then they've grazing. They're really paying farmers to try and do full grazing now. That's not the same type of grazing as in Ireland. They're not grazing. Full grazing is a very different definition in a lot of these farms than what you get in Ireland. But serious amounts of money going in, 3.5 cents per litre, so 20 grand potentially per farm. That's Friesland Campina. Arla, similar Danish dairy crop, 8,000 dairy farms, various different places, signed up again to the Science Based Targets Initiative. They've set aside 500 million across a number of years for this farm ahead program, 4 cent per litre bonus possible. Here's the agricultural level emissions, the farm level emissions. Yeah, vast majority of the emissions that Ireland are responsible for. And they then have set this target to reduce that by 30% by 2030. Again, and they've kind of various different themes. So feed efficiency, fertilizer use, land use, protein efficiency, they're the big five. And then they've sustainable feed, some kind of biodiversity measures too. But I'm just going to go through these a bit quicker. You kind of getting the idea. There's these results-based payment systems are being set up. Fonterra also have these kind of targets. They have a science-based target too. 30% reduction, want to be net zero by 2050. They're working on a few different things. So vaccines, kombucha, feed-based inhibitors, a few other kind of things that you don't see as much in the European space. But serious investment going into Fonterra's emission reduction targets as well. Even Dairy Farmers America, 20% of the US milk market, have signed up for this Science-Based Targets Initiative. 19,000 people working in there, big company. And they have set up some projects around regenerative agriculture, and then they have these sustainable cheese projects in climate smart dairy sector. So just to highlight these, I think this is with the government. So they're funding available, 45 million from government kind of credit schemes to do particularly manure management. And that goes to farmers. And then they're working with a Pizza Hut here to, again, roll out technologies. So this is kind of insetting. So working with a retailer to reduce emissions. They've said that 10% emission reduction has happened here. So that's at the processor level. Now I'm just going to go one step up supply chain to maybe more retailers, more wholesalers. Say Mars, obviously our large company, we've set a target to half their value chain emissions. So half the emissions from particularly at the farm level. Again, most of it's going to be dairy for Mars. So they're working with Friesland, Campina, Lakeland, Fonterra, and they're paying these companies or setting up very long-term contracts to incentivize these on-farm sustainability system payments. So here is Mars and Friesland then pushing money back down to the farmers for these sustainability payments. They do it with Friesland. I think they have something with Lakelands, but I'm not sure. And then Fonterra have a big, recently just a big investment happened there. Nestlé are doing it first move to the UK, and Sinlat also in the New Zealand. So a lot of activity happening there, and the kind of badge of credibility is the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So every company that's setting one of these insetting schemes or sustainability schemes, they use this framework to give themselves the badge of credibility. This is how we are credible when we're taking climate action. And this is an organization that was set up 2015 to kind of create a governance system for corporate transition plans. So they will review, a company will submit their transition plan, and they'll review it and assess whether it's in line with a certain, a 2 degree warming world, etc., a 1.5 degree warming world. So it's a relatively onerous process to go through. But the question is, you can set the targets in the future, but will you actually meet them? So that's what we'll be looking at over the next few years. In Irish examples, so we have Kerry, Terlawn, Lakelands, Dairygold, Carberry, just not all the processors, but and I'm not trying to, this is not exhaustive here. But a lot of them have set these science-based targets for the milk production. Kerry 30%, Terlawn 30%, Lakelands 33%, and that's actually an absolute, it's not an emission intensity reduction. Similar with Dairygold, they have an absolute emission reduction. I know Carberry are going through a process at the moment. And they all have their own sustainability programs or insetting programs. And my understanding is that they would use these to talk to their consumers or customers to be like, we're serious about sustainability, we have a science-based target, this is credible, etc. It's happening on the beef side as well. So Dawn Meats, Liffey Meats, ABP, they all have their science-based target, emission intensity reduction for beef. And then some of them are working with retailers, again, to push money back down to the farm level. So this is all, there's a lot of movement in this space. I think there's significant amounts of money being invested in these sustainability programs. This is a recent paper that came out. Interesting. Here's the QR code. It's all talking about kind of farm and finance sustainability stuff. and here they had a look at the amount of the industry throughput with a science-based target. So in the milk sector, 90% of the milk produced in Ireland has some kind of science-based target associated with it. And in the beef sector, 43%, 25%. Now, I don't think that was including KeyPack, because KeyPack just came out yesterday with their science-based target, and they've set a 36% emission reduction target. So this is going to jump. So a huge amount of the Irish agricultural system has some kind of science-based target associated with it. So it's kind of becoming the de facto corporate way to set emission reduction targets, which is, I think, an interesting development. Now, just to say, I don't think you're all familiar with the MAC curve, I'm sure. I see these insetting programs, the processors in the supply chain, particularly paying for the bottom left-hand corner here. These are the win-wins. These are things that will make the farms more efficient, probably produce more milk, etc., reduce the intensity of milk production. So this is what the industry tends to be funding at the moment, these types of activities. These ones which are costly, they don't make the farm any more money, they're just net costly. They do reduce emissions, but they're costly. These ones will be the last to be funded, and likely you will need government funding, or at least co-funding. So the TAMS is going to be a very important incentive mechanism here for the CapEx, particularly for things like slurry aeration, low emission slurry spreading, etc. Lower is for low emission slurry spreading, but I think it needs to be expanded. And for ongoing operational expenditure, I think the eco schemes in the next round of the CAP should be funding these rollout of these climate technologies. France already are funding, feed additives through an eco scheme, and I think there's some interesting policy to be developed there. I'd say in conjunction with industry, in conjunction with these insetting schemes, sustainability schemes, to get the rollout of these technologies happening on the farm. So I think there's an interesting policy discussion to be had there. Okay, EU policy quickly. I'm going to run through this, not spend too long on this. So the science-based targets is the way that these companies are setting their emission reduction targets, and then the kind of legislation side from Europe was this corporate sustainability reporting. I think we're going through a reaction against all these very heavy-handed regulations, and I'm sure you all can all understand why. The big one that I think is still got teeth is this corporate due diligence directive. It does mandate that large companies over 1,000 employees have to adopt a climate transition plan by 2029, and it includes this, chain of activities, so that the supply chain, the large, the farm-based emissions. So the very large retailers would have to adopt these transition plans, and likely, look down the supply chain and ask the processors and farmers to support it. Now, recently, France, Germany have proposed scrapping it, so let's not focus on it too much. That's further down the line. It might never be fully implemented. Similarly, this corporate sustainability reporting directive, it said kind of standardized reporting, very onerous, and it's been completely descoped and pushed back to 28. So I'm not going to spend any more time on it, but it was a big push within the corporate world, 2 years ago, but has been recently pushed back. So this science-based targets, this voluntary framework is the one that's, I think, being used by corporates much more as a way to kind of demonstrate credible commitment to these corporate reporting targets. What I want to talk about more is this carbon removals, carbon farming framework. I think it's potentially a great way to valorize biodiversity and natural vegetation on farms. So farmers can create temporary net carbon removal benefits, and that could be used to offset processor and retailer emissions. So this is a way that farmers can create value. What the price of these credits will be, or temporary net carbon removal benefits will be, I'm not sure, but it seems like a mechanism for farmers to generate value that they can then sell up the supply chain for insetting, and potentially outside the supply chain too. It doesn't just have to be insetting. Yeah, so if you want to go and read about it, here's a QR code. It's always good to go and read the stuff yourself. There's a lot of documentation there. some of the big things that farmers can do is kind of soil management strategy. So how to reduce emissions from soil, how to also increase sequestration of soil, and then broadly agroforestry, but this includes kind of natural vegetation, hedgerows, etc. So sequestration from existing vegetation, hedges, trees, scrub, is included if it's less than 5 years old. And this is something that the 5 years old piece is something I'm going to, I think we should extend that back to 10, 15 years. You know, a lot of vegetation is there, and sequestering emissions. And 5 years is I think overly punitive from a policy side. And in these policies, it all comes back down to what's the baseline? When do we start counting? So when you talk about what's the standardized baseline for agroforestry, it's when do we start, accounting for when a forest is sequestering emissions. And the question here is, the standardized baseline equal to zero is anything should be able to, any emission reductions, any sequestration we should count. Activity specific is, a conifer forest sequesters more than a semi-natural forest, so they have different. We weight the baseline compared to what kind of vegetation it is. What I think we need to do is have this baseline equal to zero, but remove this threshold for this 5-year start period, right? So we need to count back further than this 5 years. That's only very recent hedgerows, very recent plantings. So I would like to set this vegetation back further, like this baseline back further to 10, 15 years, so that we can count the sequestration that's already going on in existing vegetation on farms to valorize the vegetation that's already there. And there's another piece here that I think should be changed. So this is the percentage area of natural land covers on farms. Every farmer should have at least 4% for what's it called, the GAEC, good agricultural practices, or 4% is a minimum baseline for getting capped payments. And then there's a space for nature eco scheme, so the 7 and 10%. This is also there's payments available for this 7 to 10% habitat on farms. When we measure farms, most farms tend to be our average measurement tends to be around 14% in Irish farms. But there's an additionality rule that says that this part of the vegetation, anything above 10%, if it's not financially created by the credits from the carbon removals framework, it doesn't count, right? So if the payments from the CRCF don't create the vegetation, it can't be counted as a credit. I think that's a bit, again, it removes any, it doesn't make any vegetation above this 10% mark here. It removes any incentive to keep it or to have it. It makes it valueless, I think. So I think we should, again, there needs to be some changes how the CRCF is set up, because you could plant new vegetation and then you can get the credits for it, but it stops. It's an issue, I think, that you don't get. Existing vegetation is not valued in the way it should be. So in this case, there actually are. So Christian Holzleitner, he's the head of the unit that looks at the carbon removal stuff, and they are looking for engagement. So there is a link here. You can go and have a look at what the current proposals are for how to do this what are the framework for measuring all these. The way to create these credits. And I think we need to remove the financial additionality rule and then extend the baseline more than 5 years. So I'm going to be submitting this in the next, after this meeting. And then finally on the European policy space, this has just been released. So they're talking about nature credits. And this is the first time I've seen the Commission do this. So they're having a meeting on the 24th of June to discuss nature credits and how they can then support, again, valorizing biodiversity at the farm level, and to try and close the funding gap for conserving biodiversity. So again, I think this is another potential policy that would be needed to valorize any of the vegetation beyond that 10% limit that's funded through the cap. So they're the interesting policy spaces, I think, that would valorize biodiversity. So I want to go and change now from talking about the policy and how we measure, why measure this, to how we might measure this. So I want to talk about AI remote sensing section. So what I set out to do with this work was to create a satellite-based habitat mapping system. So I used to be somebody who would go and walk farms. I would walk around and hand draw maps for farms and to try and measure the space for nature, what type of habitats there are, semi-natural grassland, hedgerow, woodland, etc. But that was a slow process. I could maybe do a farm a day at best. And you do get a lot more information at the farm level, species level stuff. You get fine-grained habitat quality information. But if you wanted to do this at scale for many farms, it just wasn't feasible and very costly. So I set out to build as a habitat mapping system that would make this cost effective, and we could do essentially anywhere in the world. So what the idea is that we purchase an image for a farm, and we get the farm boundary, we snip it out, we process it into a habitat map, and then we can also create some kind of condition map from this too. So this is the tool I wanted to create. And the inspiration for this was the National Land Cover Map. So this is an amazing resource, and I think it's very accurate and impressively accurate in how it's classified the semi-natural habitats in Ireland. So you can see the broadleaf trees here, semi-natural grassland, improved grassland, tree lines, scrub, transitional forest, quite high resolution hedgerows in terms of its mapping ability. And it's, a great resource, but the reference year is 2018, and it's using aerial imagery. So the plane is flown for the whole country, and then you can create this national land cover map, but you only have it for one point in time. So what I wanted to do was to recreate the kind of functionality of this, but then just apply it to satellite imagery so that we could do it again and again and again for any point of time we want. And then you could do it globally as well. So you don't have to just do it for Ireland, but you could do it anywhere in the world. So when you're talking about satellites, the resolution is very important. So these are 4 different satellites that we could use and have used. So Sentinel is a European satellite. You can see the resolution is kind of, each pixel here is 10 meters by 10 meters. So there's a hedgerow here, but it gets quite blurry. And Spot is a 6-meter resolution satellite. Spot is, you can sharpen that up, you can increase the resolution, and you get to 1.5. Then there's also this Pleiades satellite. So these are all privately owned satellites. This one here is owned by the European Space Agency. You can get the imagery available for free, which is great, but the resolution isn't that amazing. These are all Airbus satellites. So Airbus, the big French aerospace company, you've flown in some of the planes. They have satellites too, and this is their highest resolution one. So they can get down to 50 centimeter resolution, and you can really see the linear features on farms. So we preferentially will use this 50 centimeter resolution imagery to map a farm, so we can get the very high resolution imagery, right? Get those linear features, which can be 50% of a habitat on a farm. If this imagery isn't available, the 50 centimeter, we'll go back to 1.5 meter and use that as a fallback. And then we do use the 10-meter resolution, but we only use it to get seasonal information, like seasonal changes. So we'll get imagery for winter, spring, summer, and autumn, and create these kind of composites of those seasons. And you can see the changes across those seasons, and that it's very useful for detecting what is semi-natural grassland from what is kind of intensive pasture. So we have some kind of temporal component with this Sentinel-2 data. So we combine the Sentinel lower resolution, but we've got this time component with this high resolution snapshot to give us our data that we use to train the model. And then it's always what counts as biodiversity is an important question. So we map all these different land covers, so pasture, arable, bare fields, artificial surfaces, water, and we don't count those as biodiversity. And then there's other land covers that we do or we don't, depending on the region. So conifer woodland in Ireland, we wouldn't really count it as biodiversity. We can weight it, but typically we don't count it because it's a productive feature. Then we have deciduous woodland, which we do, scrub, hedgerow, semi-natural grassland, which all counts as biodiversity. In other parts of the world, conifer woodland is native, so we weight it up there. And then what we're kind of measuring against, what's our benchmark for biodiverse, is this 10% agricultural area. So this is with a policy set in European policy. So 10% is within the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030. They said at the end of the decade, we would like agricultural landscapes to have 10% area under high diversity landscape features. So we can tell whether a farm is above or below this mark. And I think that's a decent benchmark. Like, so if a farm is at 10%, I would consider that relatively biodiverse, particularly for an intensive farm. And then anything above that should be valued in a way using the CRCF, using these potential nature credits to make it valuable for a farmer to actually have the biodiversity there. So accuracy assessment. So we add all these different, I'm not going to go through all this, the technical side of it too much, but we add a lot of information in. Our accuracy assessment comes in at about 85 to 88% accuracy, which is, decent. That the industry standard is around mid-80s. Obviously, we want to try and push this up, and we're doing some research right now to see if we can get into the mid to low 90s. And if we really want to do change detection, year-on-year change detection, we need to have it up at that level, at 95% accuracy. So that's our aim, is to push this up even further. Just to show you some examples, and I'll actually go into show you actually real live examples. So this is from Cork, Limerick, and then this is Lyons Farm in Dublin. And what I want, so we've pasture here in green, semi-natural woodland in bright green, conifer in red, scrub in blue, scrub in orange, semi-natural grassland in light blue. And what I want to highlight is that we're picking up the semi-natural grassland within the pasture, which is key. So there's a lot of farm areas around Ireland where they have semi-natural grassland in the farm, and it's important to be able to pick those up in the pasture. Similarly here, we're picking up the semi-natural grassland within the pasture. This is an organic dairy farm just south of Limerick city. And I also would note the width of the hedgerows here. So these hedgerows are very wide in pink compared to Lyons Farm, where the width of the hedgerows is much thinner. So we can measure the area of the hedgerows, the width, because we're using very high resolution imagery. And that's important for things like habitat condition. So once we have a habitat map, we can then try and measure the quality of those habitats too. So this is not going out of species level stuff. We're not doing farm surveys. So it's an index. It's an indicator, but it's not the same as doing an actual on farm survey. Just to show you how I do it for woody features. So in Ireland, let's bring all this in. For Ireland, we would reward the habitat type of a woody feature. So semi-natural forest gets a better score than conifer, and scrub is in between. The area, so the bigger the area of a habitat, the better it is for biodiversity. So we'd reward polygons or habitat patches that are above 2 hectares. The shape is also important. So something that's a complex shape, non-circular, non-square, a lot of boundary on it. We'd reward that. There's particular species that occur at the edge of a habitat. So we reward very complex shapes, and then we reward connectivity. So this hedgerow here connects these 2 patches, so that's well connected. So we'd score that as well. Whereas this islet here is just on its own, so it's not connecting 2 pieces of habitat, so it gets a lower quality score. And then the degree of core habitat, so kind of inverse of shape, or the edge. So the more green there is in proportion to the edge, more core here in proportion to the edge, the higher we weight. And this way we can score each polygon on a farm. So this hedgerow here is wide. It's connected to both ends, and it's a better quality hedgerow than say this one here, which is not connected to both ends, or this one here, which is again not connected. So this is a way to score individual habitats on farms remotely. And what we need to do now is to really validate that by going down to farm level and seeing, does that correspond with species level indicators. So I just want to show you quickly the final product of what that looks like. So we've taken that model that I was talking about and built it out into a product. So I'm just going to go through a few different examples from across Europe of farms that we've mapped using this process. So we have 79 farms on the platform here, and then this is the kind of average space for nature across those 79 farms. So I'm going to show you one from Sweden. So just to run you through this. Farm identifier, date of acquisition. So we kind of have a time-stamped image. This is from 6th of August 2024. And in this case, we're using this 1.5 meter resolution satellite. And this is the total area. This is the percentage of habitat we measure at the farm. And then we can actually go in and view the map. And it's central Finland. And we get the polygons, so we get the boundaries for the farm from something like a LIPA system. And then we purchase the imagery that you see here. This is kind of background Google imagery. And then this is the imagery that we actually purchased from Airbus. And we process that into habitat maps. You can see that's forest. There's bits of forest here. Not all that much. And a scrubby habitat here. And honestly, at this site, this farm, there's not that much habitat, but 5%. So not overly biodiverse, we would say. So that's just an example from Finland. And then we could go to, we go to an Irish example.
Sorry, Cian, just getting tight for time now. We've lots of
Sure.
questions coming in for you. So yeah.
I'll finish with this one. So this is one from Ireland, 16th of August as well, 50 centimeter resolution, and we can see the habitat percentage is at 15%. And we can open it up, and this is a habitat map. So you can see the image, and then you can pull out the neighborhood features, broadleaf, etc. So it's a nice biodiverse farm from Ireland. And again, we can do this year on year on year and go back in time. So it's a very scalable way to do this biodiversity measurement. I can keep talking, but I'll stop there and we can take some of the questions.
That's super keen. That was an excellent presentation. Really interesting. You've provoked a lot of thought there. A lot of comments coming through there. Just to say, well done in the presentation. Really interesting. Great work. There's a good few questions, so we might as well tear into it. I suppose the insetting, that's generated a lot of thought here. Is there a danger in insetting when companies are paying farmers for sustainability on the farm, that the price kind of almost remains the same? So it looks like they're paying for sustainability, but the price of the milk or beef suffers, and it looks like they're paying extra, but they're not.
Yeah, I've heard so that you redistribute the milk price or the price of the beef just from poor performers to and I think this is why the processors need the partnership with the wholesalers and supply chain. Can you actually create value from the insetting schemes rather than just redistribute money between the existing farmer base? So I think you do need to try and bring in the Nestle's, but like that depends on what processors you are. That's an issue. I know that, and there's governance issues there. That is for like Friesland, Campina. They say that a third of their funding for that 45 million comes from this redistribution piece. A third comes from the value chain, and then a third comes from I'm not sure where. But yeah, certainly that's
an issue.
I can understand the anger at the farm level for that.
Yeah, it's just it's a concern for farmers and for all of us, I suppose, because that's what's going to make or break us. But there's a couple of comments here around the price for sustainability in Ireland. Compared to other countries, it's low.
The price,
premium the premiums are for percent maybe for milk or whatever.
It is, It's and I'm comparing against like some of the biggest, most progressive companies there. So Friesland and Ireland, they do have these partnerships that enable them to pay these with further supply chain that enable them to pay these higher prices. The sustainability bonus. I think it's also like the bonuses have increased in Ireland. Like when they brought them in, you're looking at 0.5 cent a litre, and now I see some with like 1.25, etc. So I think they will. I think these companies started earlier. Some of them started in 2015, whereas the ones I know in Ireland started maybe 2021, 22. So I think we're just a little bit behind as well on the ramp up. Part of the research that we'll be doing is interviewing these sustainability managers in these companies to understand what is the future. What do these look like in 10 years?
Ivan, a couple of questions coming through if you want to take a few.
Yeah, thanks, Cathal. Just maybe as a tie-in, I was at an extensive grassland event yesterday with Teagasc and the Heritage Council, but we were looking at the values of these high value extensive grasslands, Cian. But just on your mapping, we'll say, are you picking up the difference between a kind of a low value natural grassland versus a high value
Yeah,
extensive grassland?
I wouldn't want to sign off on that. We typically work at the extensive end of the system, where it's more obvious when it's improved agricultural grassland compared to some kind of semi-natural grassland. So we don't really go beyond semi-natural grassland. We wouldn't have the accuracy to distinguish that well. I think you'd need some kind of drone level imagery, but that's then much more expensive to do it.
And kind of just related maybe on the land cover issue, just maybe to those two questions on that, just regarding peatland, any category for that, and the other one, I suppose, it was the multi-species swards and potential for medium level biodiversity value and so on.
Yeah, so peatland, yes, we do detect that.
Okay.
So kind of upland, grassland, peatland, we've category, we do detect that. Like we will work with people to try and assess how well we can detect various different habitat types. So if you're interested, follow up with us and we can try and develop out, we'll run campaigns for specific supply chains, specific regions to see if we can detect those habitats. So, completely open to that. We'll see how far the technology can go. For the multi-species wards, it's there's a texture difference there with multi-species wards, so it's potentially possible to do it. But we haven't said about trying to do it. I think it'd be an interesting research question. Can you do that remotely?
Just another one on the biodiversity side. You mentioned about the issue of going back 5 years, we'll say, for your baseline. I was just thinking again but the whole, okay, on the side of the fairness of that is one element, but the whole principle of, when you're protecting biodiversity would be to retain existing habitats rather than creating habitats. So
Yeah.
are you incentivizing the potential or potentially incentivizing in that framework, the damage to existing to create something that might have a lower biodiversity value in the long run?
Yeah, and I think this is why it is carbon focused. So this may be why the nature bit needs to be brought into it a bit more, and the nature credits might. But that's a long way down the road. The nature credit piece. Don't really start to discuss that. And this is why I would want to extend the baseline further back past 5 years. I think you are at risk of potentially losing those. The species-rich hedgerows. Like where's most biodiversity in farms in Ireland? It's in hedgerows. So the tree lines, etc. Particularly in the intensive sector. So I think we do need to valorize that. And if many farms we measure are over that 10% target, 10% level, and in this framework they wouldn't be rewarded for it. So I think we should. And Ireland in particular is probably like there's a lot of biodiversity on Irish farms compared to other types of farming systems because of this small fields. Hedgerows used as fence fields. So I think it would hit Ireland a bit harder to have that kind of that 5 year baseline there than other countries as well.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And just before I go back to Cathal, just on the cost positive measures such as feed additives, and I think your view was should be paid for by the public. But is there potential massive gain for industry, and should there be scope for cost sharing in this scenario?
Yeah, I think there should be. So I think the new eco schemes should leverage the infrastructure of these sustainability schemes. Like there is this. I think there's more trust with the farmers and the co-ops, etc. Than some other potentially government systems. So I think if the eco schemes could roll out the feed additives type things through the sustainability bonuses, and it's co-funded, so maybe someone's coming from industry, but someone's coming from government. I would say that as the lever to pull to scale this than any other way. All that infrastructure is already on the ground. The advisory services tend to be there. So that's my view on it.
Yeah, great. So,
Cian, what's your view on emission trading within the agricultural sector, similar to likes of Denmark, New Zealand, and I suppose carbon farming and even forestry and that exchange of credits?
Yeah, I think if done well, it can be good. But all these things, if done well, can be good. In New Zealand, so the comparison I was making, so they go back to 1990 with vegetation. So vegetation exists before 1990. They include the sequestration of vegetation, and that can be used as a credit in the New Zealand ETS, the emissions trading scheme. I'm not too familiar with how that works though, so I don't want to make a broader point on that. But I think it's a good example of a different kind of baseline. And then I don't think the agricultural credits should be included in like the actual industrial ETS. Like it's different to have a sequestration in a hedgerow compared to like emissions from a factory. I don't think they should be used to offset each other. But I think it's, it could be offsetting emissions from peatland and then forestry. Like those two, I think if you're, emissions, sequestration in land should probably offset emissions from land. It would be my.
Yeah, and do you know the 5-year rule that you mentioned, that you said you prefer to go back further than 5 years? Where did it get to 5 years from?
I don't know. Just in the actually, I haven't seen the reason for it. That was just what the debate was in the technical documents, was 5 years or more.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. And there's another question here that you suggest that cost positive measures such as feed additives should be paid by the public, but is there potentially a massive gain for the industry? Surely there's scope for cost sharing.
Yeah, massive gain as in like emission reduction gain. There is, but again, I don't think it's cracked yet in Ireland, the pasture-based system. Certainly during housing, I think it would make sense to feed it. But it's still expensive. It's still like €100 a ton emission reduction. It's expensive to reduce that in that way. But yeah, I think it to meet those targets that they're setting, 30% targets. I think industry and government should pull in the same direction there, and I think fund it through the sustainability schemes that the processors have. Way to do it.
Sorry, Evan, go ahead.
Sorry there, Cathal. Yeah, no, just there's loads of interesting questions. One is just on, I suppose, one I was thinking myself, was just on the imagery. Cian will say the applied is the 50 centimeter imagery versus, we'll say, the Cinetal, and that would be probably more commonly available. One, I suppose, one question here is, what would be the indicative cost, we'll say, for 100 farms for that type of high quality imagery? And I suppose what I'm wondering myself is, technology is moving so fast all the time. Where are we likely to be with the availability of this imagery over the next few years?
Sure. So we can map a farm for €15 and make a margin on it. So that's cost effective, I think. Do 100 farms, 100, whatever that is, 15 by 150. Not that expensive. So I think it's only going one direction. Like you can get imagery now that's 15 centimeter resolution. So they take that 50 centimeter and then they apply some AI stuff to it, and it goes down to 15 centimeters. So it's remarkable the resolution you can get. And then there's two pieces to resolution piece. Is the temporal resolution, how often can you image a place, and then what's the actual spatial resolution of the pixels. So there's satellites now that 3-meter resolution that you can get daily images from a site. The combination of those two is powerful.
Brilliant. And I know, because there's a few questions regarding, the availability of, number one, some of the imagery and work that you have done. So that, and probably tied to that then is, we'll say very much so, is, the technology. So when you say €15, I think you mentioned there a minute ago.
Yeah.
So we'll say for a project that wants to survey, as was here, 100 farms, is the cost, is that low?
We can do it at that level. Now, for us, the scale is what we've set out to create a product that would do whole supply chains. We do 1,000 farms. So when you do 1,000 farms, we're trying to hit that €15 price. We can do, if we're doing only 10 farms, we'd like to charge more, but that's up for discussion in terms of like where is this going and all that kind of stuff. But we can do it for 15.
Okay. No, it's really interesting. And just two. Sorry, Cathal, I know you're coming in there. Just two questions. I suppose I'll get them together. One is, does your Space for Nature calculation include the Commission's weighting factors? And a little bit linked to that is, do you have any plans to use this method to monitor Ireland's progress towards the objectives set out under the EU Nature Restoration Law? So
it doesn't include weighting factors. Well, conifer, it depends on who we're talking to. Conifer, we can weight at 20%, like 20% of the area, but typically we just measure it as not habitat. We tend to just do straight area measurements. We don't do weightings on it. But if customers want a weighting, we'll work with them. We can design systems however you want. Particularly in the regen space, regen agriculture, it's a big thing. They want to typically do some kind of weighting. And then we don't have any plans to do the nature restoration piece, but that'd be interesting to talk about for sure.
Yeah, it could be a good space for it to see how progress goes and so on.
How does it compare to LiDAR, Cian?
Look, LiDAR is going to be much better. We don't have height imagery, we don't have height data. So I hope there's government does a LiDAR survey of the country, and then if they make that available to people like us, we can include that, and then we can really see, the exact boundary of hedgerows, etc. Would make it more accurate.
Have you done much just on that? Have you done much correspondence between what we'll see? You mentioned you started off on the ground, kind of walking farms and so on. Have you done much ground proofing of the likes of what the imagery is telling you on hedgerows and the quality of those hedgerows versus what you're finding on the ground?
So we've done the ground proofing for like the analysis of what the habitat type is, but we haven't yet done the quality piece. Ground proofing. Okay. Yeah. That's the next thing to do.
Okay. All right, Cathal, back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for today, Cian. There was a lot of questions coming through, and apologies to everybody for we didn't get them done, but I think you've done a pretty good job in getting through a lot of them. So, Cian, look, thanks a million for a really excellent presentation, certainly thought-provoking and a very interesting topic. And Ivan, thank you very much for helping out with questions today. And also thanks to Mary O'Loughlin for helping out the background today to run the webinar. And for next week, we're back again at 9:30 and next Friday as well. And we can look forward to Teagasc researcher Dr. Donal O'Brien, who will join us in the webinar to talk about carbon footprinting in Irish tillage products. And that's not to be missed. So do tune in again next Friday at 9:30. Slán go fóill.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.